Sometimes the most powerful stories hide in plain sight, waiting 20 years for someone brave enough to ask the right question. Harold Winters was 78 years old when his Christmas tradition finally caught someone's attention, revealing a love story that would change an entire community's understanding of what devotion really means. Hi everyone, welcome to Tales Unveiled. Let's get started. Harold Winters had been coming to Mel's Diner every Christmas Day for exactly 20 years. Always the same booth in the corner, always at exactly 2:30 p.m., always ordering the same thing. Turkey dinner with mashed potatoes, green beans, and apple pie. And always, he sat completely alone. The diner staff had grown accustomed to seeing him there. Some had worked at Mel's long enough to remember when Harold first started coming in. Others were newer, but they'd all heard about the elderly man who spent Christmas afternoon in Booth 7, quietly eating his meal while family celebrated around him. Poor old guy, the newer waitresses would whisper. No family to spend Christmas with. But the veteran staff knew better than to feel sorry for Harold. There was something about his demeanor, something peaceful and purposeful about the way he conducted his annual ritual. He wasn't sad or lonely. He was waiting, though waiting for what nobody could say. Harold would arrive at exactly 2:30, dressed in his best navy blue suit with a red tie. He'd nod politely to whoever was working the front counter, make his way to Booth 7, and settle in with a worn leather journal. He'd order his meal, eat slowly while writing in the journal, and always leave a generous tip before departing at exactly 4:15 p.m. The routine never varied, not once in 20 years. Mel Patterson, the diner's owner, had long ago stopped questioning Harold's Christmas visits. The old man was unfailingly polite, never caused any trouble, and always paid his bill. More importantly, there was something almost sacred about Harold's presence that Mel couldn't quite explain. The diner felt different on Christmas Day when Harold was there, more peaceful, somehow more complete. He's been coming here longer than some of my regular staff have worked here, Mel would tell curious customers. 20 years, same booth, same order, same time. Clockwork. The other customers noticed Harold too. Families would glance over at the solitary figure in the corner booth, some with pity, others with curiosity. Children would ask their parents why the nice old man was eating alone on Christmas, and parents would shush them, not wanting to intrude on whatever private ritual Harold was observing. Over the years, a few well-meaning souls had tried to invite Harold to join their families for Christmas dinner. The Hendersons had approached him in 2018, asking if he'd like to come to their house instead of eating alone. Harold had smiled warmly and thanked them for their kindness, but politely declined. "I appreciate the offer more than you know," he'd said, his voice gentle but firm. "But I have an appointment to keep." An appointment. That's how Harold always referred to his Christmas visits. Never tradition or habit. Always an appointment, as if he were meeting someone specific at a predetermined time. The mystery deepened when people began to notice other peculiarities about Harold's visits. He always requested that Booth 7 be set for 2 people, even though he was clearly dining alone. The staff would dutifully place 2 sets of silverware, 2 napkins, 2 water glasses. Harold never objected or asked them to remove the extra place setting. In fact, he seemed to prefer it that way. Even stranger, Harold would occasionally speak quietly to the empty seat across from him, not loudly enough for anyone to hear what he was saying, but clearly carrying on some kind of conversation. He'd pause, as if listening to responses, then nod and continue writing in his journal. Some staff members found it unsettling. Others found it touching. All of them respected Harold's privacy enough not to eavesdrop or ask questions. Jenny Martinez had been working at Mel's for 3 years when she first encountered Harold. It was Christmas Day, 2019, her first holiday shift, and she'd been warned about the elderly man who would occupy Booth 7 for exactly 1 hour and 45 minutes. Just treat him normal, the other waitresses had advised. He's a little odd, but he's harmless. Good tipper, too. Jenny had served Harold his turkey dinner that day, noting how he thanked her with old-fashioned courtesy and made pleasant small talk about the weather. What struck her most was how he seemed genuinely content, not lonely or dejected as she'd expected. He carried himself with quiet dignity, and there was something almost regal about the way he conducted his solitary meal. After Harold left that day, Jenny had asked Mel about him. Does he really come in every single Christmas? Every single one for 20 years, Mel confirmed. Rain, shine, snow, doesn't matter. 2:30 sharp, booth 7, turkey dinner. But why? Jenny pressed. What's he doing here? Mel had shrugged. Never asked. Figure it's none of my business. Man's got his reasons. That became Jenny's philosophy, too, at least for the first couple of years. Harold was a fixture, part of the diner's Christmas landscape. She'd serve him his meal, make polite conversation, and watch him write in his journal while speaking softly to the empty chair across from him. But Jenny Martinez was naturally curious, and as the years passed, she found herself increasingly intrigued by Harold's story. She began to pay closer attention to his visits, noticing details others had missed. Harold always brought fresh flowers, not expensive arrangements, but small bouquets of white roses that he'd place on the table near the empty chair. He'd adjust them carefully, as if making sure they were positioned just right for someone else to enjoy. His journal writing followed a pattern, too. He'd write for about 10 minutes, then look up at the empty seat and speak quietly for another few minutes. Then he'd write some more, back and forth, as if recording both sides of conversation. Most tellingly, Harold's expressions during these visits weren't sad or melancholy. He looked peaceful, sometimes even happy. Whatever he was doing, whoever he thought he was meeting, it brought him comfort rather than pain. By Christmas 2022, Jenny's curiosity had grown into genuine concern and affection for Harold. She'd been serving him for 4 years, and though their conversations remained brief and polite, she developed a fondness for the mysterious old gentleman who treated her with such consistent kindness. That year, she decided to pay closer attention to what Harold was writing. Not to snoop, exactly, but to better understand what drew him to the diner every Christmas. During one of her trips to refill his coffee, she caught a glimpse of his neat handwriting. And Jenny brought the turkey over with that sweet smile of hers. You always said the staff here were like family. Harold was writing about her, about the diner staff, as if he were telling someone else about his experience. The revelation both touched and puzzled Jenny. Who was Harold talking to in his journal? And why did he feel the need to document every detail of his Christmas visits? Christmas 2023 brought an unexpected development. Harold arrived at his usual time, in his usual booth, but something was different. He seemed friendlier than before, moving more slowly and pausing to catch his breath. When Jenny brought his water, she noticed his hands were shaking slightly. Mr. Winters, she said gently. She'd learned his name from his credit card receipts years ago. Are you feeling all right today? Harold looked up at her with those kind eyes that had always reminded her of her own grandfather. I'm fine, dear. Just getting old, I suppose. Time catches up with all of us eventually. Something in his tone worried Jenny. There was a weariness there that she hadn't heard before, a sense of finality. As Harold ate his meal that day, Jenny found herself watching him more closely. His ritual was the same: the flowers, the journal, the quiet conversations with the empty chair. But there was something different about his demeanor. He seemed to be savoring every moment, as if he knew something the rest of them didn't. When Harold finished his apple pie and prepared to leave, he did something he'd never done before. He walked over to the counter where Jenny was working and handed her an envelope. Jenny, he said quietly, you've been so kind to me over the years. If anything ever happens to me, would you please make sure this gets to the right people? Jenny took the envelope, her hands trembling slightly. Harold's name was written on the front in the same neat handwriting she'd glimpsed in his journal. Mr. Winters, what do you mean? Are you okay? Harold smiled, but it was a sad smile this time. I'm fine, dear. Just an old man being cautious. Thank you for everything. He left his usual generous tip and walked out into the cold December afternoon. Jenny stood holding the envelope, a sick feeling growing in her stomach. Something was wrong. She could feel it. 3 days later, Jenny's fears were confirmed. Harold Winters suffered a massive heart attack at his home and was rushed to the hospital. He survived, but the doctor says heart muscle had been severely damaged. At 78, with multiple health complications, his prognosis wasn't good. Jenny visited him in the hospital, bringing flowers and a card signed by the entire diner staff. Harold was touched by the gesture, but she could see the worry in his eyes. "The doctors say I might not make it to next Christmas," he told her quietly. 21 years I've been keeping that appointment. I can't miss it. I can't break the promise." "What promise, Mr. Winters?" Jenny asked gently. "What appointment?" Harold looked at her for a long moment, as if deciding whether to trust her with something precious. Finally he spoke. "I promised my wife, Dorothy, that I'd meet her for Christmas dinner every year, no matter what. She died 21 years ago, on Christmas Eve. The last thing she said to me was that she'd wait for me at our favorite booth at Mel's Diner every Christmas Day at 2:30. She said death couldn't stop our tradition." Jenny felt tears spring to her eyes. "The empty chair is for Dorothy," Harold finished. "She's been there every year, waiting for me. I know how it sounds, but I can feel her presence. I can almost see her smile when I tell her about my year, about the kind people at the diner who become like family." Jenny was quiet for a moment, processing this revelation. "Mr. Winters, what will happen if you can't make it this Christmas?" Harold's eyes filled with tears. "I'll have broken the most important promise I ever made. After 62 years of marriage, I'll have let her down when she needed me most." Jenny squeezed his hand. "Mr. Winters, what if I told you there might be another way?" That's when Jenny Martinez decided to do something that would change everything. Not just for Harold, but for everyone at Mel's Diner who had wondered about the lonely old man's Christmas ritual. What she discovered about Harold and Dorothy's love story, and what she did to honor their devotion, would restore an entire community's faith in the power of true love and the lengths people will go to keep their promises. Jenny Martinez left the hospital that day with a determination she'd never felt before. Harold Winters had kept his promise to Dorothy for 20 years, and she wasn't going to let his failing health break that sacred covenant now. The first person she called was Mel Patterson. When she explained Harold's situation and the true meaning behind his Christmas visits, there was a long silence on the other end of the phone. 20 years, Mel finally said, his voice thick with emotion. "That old man has been having dinner with his deceased wife in my diner for 20 years, and none of us knew. Mel, he's terrified he won't be able to make it this Christmas," Jenny explained. "The doctors aren't optimistic about him being discharged by then. What if we brought Christmas dinner to him?" "You mean cater the hospital?" Mel asked. "No," Jenny said, her idea crystallizing as she spoke. "I mean, we recreate Booth 7 in his hospital room. Make it feel like he's really there with Dorothy." Mel was quiet for another moment. "Jenny, that's beautiful. But how?" Jenny had spent the drive home from the hospital thinking about exactly that. "I have a plan, but I'm going to need everyone's help." The next morning, Jenny gathered the entire Mel's Diner staff for an emergency meeting. She told them Harold's story, about Dorothy, about the promise, about 20 years of Christmas dinners with the love of his life. By the time she finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. "So here's what I'm thinking," Jenny continued, pulling out a notebook where she'd sketched her plan. "We recreate the entire experience in his hospital room. Same table, same chairs, same decorations, same meal. Everything exactly as it would be if he were sitting in Booth 7. Maria Santos, the head cook who'd been at Mel's for 15 years, was the first to speak up. "I'll prepare his turkey dinner exactly the way he likes it, down to the last detail." "I can bring the flowers," offered Lisa Chun, the newest waitress. "White roses, right? That's what he always brings." "I'll talk to the hospital," said Danny Wright, who handled deliveries, "see if we can get permission to set up in his room." But it was old Pete Kowalski, who'd been bussing tables at Mel's longer than anyone, who asked the important question. "What about the other customers? The families who always see him there? Won't they notice he's missing?" Jenny smiled. She thought of that too. That's where the community comes in. Over the next 2 weeks, Jenny executed a plan that would make any event coordinator proud. She reached out to the regular customers who'd noticed Harold over the years, the families who tried to invite him to their homes, the couples who'd wondered about his story, the children who'd asked their parents about the nice old man who ate alone. When people learned the truth about Harold and Dorothy's love story, The response was overwhelming. The Hendersons, who tried to invite Harold to their home in 2018, immediately volunteered to help with setup and transportation. "That man has been honoring true love for 20 years," Mrs. Henderson said. "It's time we honored him back." The Martinez family, who owned the flower shop downtown, donated white roses for Harold Hospital Room and for Booth 7 at the diner. For Dorothy, Mr. Martinez said simply. Even the hospital staff got involved once they heard Harold's story. Dr. Patricia Walsh, Harold's cardiologist, personally ensured that his room will be available for the Christmas Day gathering. "In 30 years of medicine, I've never seen anything like this," she told Jenny. Love really can be healing. The local newspaper caught wind of the story and wanted to run an article, but Jenny politely declined. "This isn't about publicity," she explained. "It's about keeping a promise." On Christmas Eve, Harold was still in the hospital, weak but stable. Jenny visited him that evening, bringing a card from the diner staff and an update on the next day's plans. "Mr. Winters, I need you to trust me tomorrow," she said, holding his hand. "I know you're worried about missing your appointment with Dorothy, but I promise you won't miss it." Harold looked at her with those kind, tired eyes. "Jenny, you don't understand. I have to be at the diner. That's where she's waiting. What if I told you that tomorrow Dorothy won't be waiting at the diner?" Jenny said gently, "What if she'll be somewhere else?" Harold looked confused and a little frightened. "What do you mean?" Jenny squeezed his hand. "Trust me, Mr. Winters. Have I ever let you down?" Christmas Day arrived with fresh snow falling outside Harold's hospital window. At 1:30 p.m., Jenny arrived at his room with a wheelchair and his navy blue suit. "Time to get dressed for dinner," she announced cheerfully. "Jenny, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I need to be at Booth 7, Harold protested weakly. "Dorothy is waiting." "She certainly is," Jenny agreed, helping him into his wheelchair. "Just not where you think." As they rolled down the hospital corridor, Harold became increasingly agitated. "This is wrong, Jenny. I'm going to be late. I've never been late." "Mr. Winters," Jenny said softly, "do you really think Dorothy will want you to risk your health just to sit in a specific booth? Or would she want you to keep your promise in whatever way possible?" Harold was quiet for a moment. "She always was more practical than me." They reached the hospital's family gathering room, and Jenny paused outside the door. "Mr. Winters, before we go in, I need to tell you something. You've touched more lives than you know. The staff at Mel's, the customers who watch you all these years. Everyone has been moved by your devotion to Dorothy. Today, we wanted to show you that love like yours doesn't go unnoticed." Jenny opened the door, and Harold gasped. The room had been transformed into a perfect replica of Booth 7 at Mel's Diner. The same red vinyl seating, the same Formica table, even the same slightly wobbly leg that Harold always had to adjust. White roses sat in a simple vase, positioned exactly where Harold always placed them. 2 place settings were arranged perfectly, with the familiar blue and white plates from the diner. But it wasn't just the setup that took Harold's breath away. It was the people. Mel Patterson was there, wearing his chef's apron and carrying Harold's traditional Christmas dinner on a tray. Maria Santos stood beside him, beaming with pride at the perfectly prepared meal. The entire diner staff was present, but they weren't alone. The Hendersons were there with their 3 children. The Martinez family from a flower shop, Dr. Walsh, and several nurses who'd grown fond of Harold during his stay. Pete Kowalski had even brought his grandson, a shy 8-year-old who'd been fascinated by Harold's story. At least 20 people had gathered to witness Harold's Christmas dinner with Dorothy, all of them touched by a love story that had played out quietly in their community for 2 decades. "We know Dorothy is here with you," Jenny said as she helped Harold to his seat. "And we wanted to be here, too, to honor both of you." Harold was crying now, overwhelmed by the kindness surrounding him. As he settled into his chair at the familiar table, something remarkable happened. The peaceful expression that everyone at the diner had noticed for 20 years returned to his face. He straightened his tie, arranged the white roses, and smiled at the empty chair across from him. "Hello, sweetheart," he said softly. "I told you I'd never miss our appointment." The room fell silent as Harold opened his worn leather journal and began to write. His voice was stronger now as he spoke to Dorothy, telling her about the year that had passed, about the kind people who become his family, about how their love story had touched so many hearts. Mel served the turkey dinner with the same care he'd shown for 20 years at the diner. Harold ate slowly, savoring each bite while carrying on his familiar conversation with Dorothy. The observers watched in respectful silence, witnessing something sacred and beautiful. At one point, little Timothy Henderson whispered loudly to his mother, "Mommy, why is a nice man talking to nobody?" His mother started to shush him, but Harold heard and smiled gently at the boy. "I'm not talking to nobody, son. I'm talking to the most important somebody in my life. She's right there," he pointed to the empty chair, waiting patiently like she always does. Timothy nodded solemnly, as if this made perfect sense. As Harold finished his apple pie, he closed his journal and looked around the room at all the faces watching him with such warmth and respect. "I don't know how to thank you all," he said, his voice breaking with emotion. "Dorothy and I, we thought our Christmas dinners were just between us. I never imagined that our love could mean something to others." Jenny stepped forward. "Mr. Winters, you've shown all of us what real devotion looks like. You've kept a promise for 20 years, through sickness and health, in good times and bad. That's not just a love story. It's an inspiration." Dr. Walsh cleared her throat. "Mr. Winters, I have some news that I think Dorothy will want to hear. Your latest tests show significant improvement. Your heart is responding well to treatment. I believe you'll be able to return to Booth 7 next Christmas, if you'd like." Harold's face lit up with joy. "Did you hear that, Dorothy? We get to keep our tradition going." As the gathering began to wind down and people started to leave, each person stopped to shake Harold's hand or give him a gentle hug. The children left drawings they'd made of him and Dorothy having dinner together. The adults left promises to visit him during his recovery. But it was Pete Kowalski who surprised everyone the most. The quiet, gruff man who'd been bussing tables for decades approached Harold with tears in his eyes. "Mr. Winters," he said roughly, "I lost my wife 6 years ago. Been angry at the world ever since. But watching you, seeing how you've honored your Dorothy all these years, it's made me realize I've been grieving all wrong. Maybe it's time I started celebrating her memory instead of mourning her loss." Harold reached out and gripped Pete's hand. "She's not gone, Pete. Love like that doesn't die. It just changes form. Dorothy taught me that every Christmas when she shows up for our dinner date." As the room emptied, Jenny was the last to leave. She helped Harold back into his wheelchair, noting that he looked stronger and more peaceful than he had in weeks. "Jenny," Harold said as they made their way back to his room, "I have something for you." He handed her his leather journal. "I want you to have this. It's 20 years of conversations with Dorothy, 20 years of gratitude for the kindness shown by you and everyone at Mel's. I think she'd want you to understand how much your friendship has meant to us." Jenny accepted the journal with trembling hands. "Mr. Winters, I can't take this. These are your memories with Dorothy." "No, dear," Harold said with a smile. "The memories are in here." He tapped his chest over his heart. "The journal is just words on paper. But those words tell the story of how a group of strangers became family, how a simple diner became sacred ground, and how love can create miracles when people care enough to pay attention." 6 months later, Harold Winters was back home and healthier than he'd been in years. He returned to Mel's Diner regularly, not just on Christmas, but several times a week. The staff and regular customers treated him like the treasure he'd always been, but now they understood the depth of love and commitment he represented. The following Christmas, Harold arrived at Booth 7 at exactly 2:30 p.m., wearing his navy blue suit and carrying white roses. But this time, he wasn't alone. Pete Kowalski sat with him, along with Jenny and several other staff members who become part of Harold's extended family. The booth was still set for 2, one place for Harold and one for Dorothy. But now it was surrounded by people who understood that some love stories transcend death, and that the most beautiful promises are the ones we keep even when no one is watching. As Harold raised his coffee cup in a toast to Dorothy, the entire diner seemed to glow with warmth. 21 years of faithful love had created something magical, a community united by the understanding that devotion, kindness, and keeping one's word are the most valuable gifts we can give each other. To Dorothy, Harold said softly, "and to all the angels who help us keep our promises." The diner erupted in gentle applause, not for the show, but for the love that had quietly blessed their community for over 2 decades. And somewhere, in the space between faith and hope, Dorothy Winters smiled at the beautiful life her husband had built around their eternal love story. Love the story? Hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more incredible tales of devotion and community. Don't forget to check out the video currently on your screen. You won't want to miss it. See you in the next one.